Struggling to communicate with your co-parent? That's why Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger was created. It's a communication tool for all co-parents, but especially those who are in high conflict situations. I always tell co-parents who ask, sign up for Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as early as possible in your separation and divorce process, because you never know when you're going to need a more robust communication tool that allows you to set boundaries on the communication you have with your co-parent. Are you getting messages that look like War and Peace? It's not a text message. It's the length of a novel. Set the brief chat limitation in the app and keep those messages short and to the point. It's about the kids, right? Keep the focus there. You can also limit the number of messages you receive in a day and other nice a la carte features meant to bring sanity to your life. You deserve that, and your kids do too. Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger in the Apple App Store and soon in the Google Play Store. Go to peacefulparentapp.com for more information. This week on Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast.
The key thing to know about personality disorders is they have a narrow range of behavior that they repeat and repeat and repeat in various different settings. So it's not a judgment. It's not this is a bad person or evil or crazy. And you don't have to say, well, that person has a borderline personality and they have mood swings and they get violent when they're in a rage. You can just say, here's the pattern of behavior. Judges get that. They get patterns of behavior.
Welcome to Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast, where we discuss strategies and tips to improve your co-parenting situation, especially if it's high conflict. I'm Bianca Balogh, co-parent, mother, and entrepreneur, creator of Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger app, and believer in turning challenging situations into something positive. This week, we're joined by Bill Eddy, who is an expert in conflict resolution, a speaker, an author, and the co-founder and CEO of the High Conflict Institute. Bill pioneered the high conflict personality theory and is viewed globally as the leading expert on managing disputes involving people with high conflict personalities. Today, we're talking about his book called Splitting, which was originally published in 2011, but has been revised to include new information and was released again this year. Bill, it's my honor to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. How are you?
Good, Bianca. Thanks so much for having me on. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. So let's dive right in. Tell us about the book Splitting in general, and then maybe we can dive into what's new in the 2021 version.
Well, the book Splitting is really about how to manage a divorce. The subtitle is Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. Now, I want to say that you don't need to diagnose somebody, and you shouldn't tell somebody if you think that they have these issues. What's important is what you do. So in this book, it really has three parts. The first is getting ready to get divorced, what to do around the time of separation, because this can be a very intense, sometimes dangerous time. Then how to manage your case if you go to court, hiring a lawyer, dealing with evaluators if they're in your case, how to speak to the judge, what to present, all of that, and how to try to settle your case out of court, like in mediation or other forms of negotiations. And then the last part of it is how to manage the post-divorce relationship, because there's usually ongoing issues, especially with children involved. And some of the most high conflict situations seem to come up after the divorce is over. I've been involved in many cases where there's custody battles worse than during the divorce, after the divorce is over. So I talk about managing that relationship to try to keep things calm and not end up back in court or having to make big decisions. It's from my perspective as a therapist, licensed clinical social worker, and as a family lawyer now for 28 years. So 15 years representing clients in court. So it's bringing all that together. I tried to squeeze it all into one book and updated it with some new information to make it easier to manage your case.
Yes, I love it. It sounds super inclusive. And yeah, as I know firsthand, a lot of times you end up back in court time and time again when your parenting plan isn't super solid. So you end up going back to kind of clarify things, which can be really stressful. So I loved the double meaning of the book title. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, when we're talking about like personality disorders or more generally what I call high conflict people, one of the terms that's often associated with personality disorders is splitting, which means seeing people as all good or all bad. And everyone knows that human beings have strengths and weaknesses, good and bad qualities in all of us. But when people have these disorders, they start seeing people in extreme terms, like I'm the perfect parent, everything I do is absolutely right, and the other person is the worst parent in the world, and they probably should never be allowed to ever see the child again. That can be a distortion that's called splitting in those all or nothing terms. Of course, that's the mental health side, and then splitting where you're splitting up, like a divorce, like the legal side. So it's really a combination of mental health and law. Sums it up in one word.
Yeah, I like the title. It's been out there for a while, since 2011. How has the book done versus some of the other books that you've written?
Well, actually, it's our bestseller. It sold over 100,000 copies, and that's in 10 years pretty much. So it's been close to 10,000 copies a year. A lot of our other books are specific things, like our BIF response email system, and that's more narrow and specific. And that's probably getting close to second place in terms of sales because so many people find this really helps calm conversations, especially between co-parents after a divorce. So we have a specific book on that, BIF for co-parent communication. Then we have a specific book on the issue of alienation. Don't alienate the kids. And that one's also doing pretty well. People are looking for resources. And the great thing is, as a family lawyer, as a family counselor, those fees often end up in the hundreds of dollars per hour. And yet you can get a book like Splitting for $17. I think it's somewhere around $20. I don't even keep track of the price, but that's so easy to get. And people say, I got so much information in here. This was more helpful than an hour with a lawyer. Now, you may also need the hour with the lawyer, but it's a really easy way to get a lot of information.
Right, which is mentioned in the book. Regardless of your situation, whether you're representing yourself, get with an attorney at least for an hour. But regardless of the price of the book, it definitely is money well spent because you're right. It can save you money down the road. The book's been out for a while. Why do a revision now this year in 2021?
Okay, so it's the 10th anniversary, and the publisher and I agreed that there was new information. In many ways, the basic information hasn't changed much. So I have everything that was in there the first time, but added 2 more chapters. One really focusing on abuse issues, domestic violence, child abuse, alienation issues, which were touched on in the first book, but developing them a little more. And the other chapter is presenting your case. Because for the last 10 years, and even now, I do a lot of consultation with people going through high conflict divorces, getting ready for mediation, getting ready for court, and presenting their case. I really developed a method that I think is necessary when you're dealing with a high conflict person on the other side. Briefly, it's emphasizing 3 key themes and repeating and repeating and repeating, because that's what high conflict people do. They have a simple, emotional, repetitive message, and it gets through. It gets through to the judge's brain or an evaluator's brain, and that sticks. And they go, oh, this is the such and such case, when it might not be that at all. And so you need to present your case in simple terms emotional terms with a lot of repetition, but not high conflict emotions, just words that get attention, like the other person is manipulating professionals or emotionally abusive with the child. So that there's words that get your attention, but they have to be true and you have to be able to support them. Because the worst thing is to say, well, in this case, we have someone who's violent. And then you say, yeah, he raises his eyebrows every so often. So you've got to be able to say, yes, I was hit on this day, and this was broken on that day, and this person is controlling all my finances and phone calls. That's different. So anyway, it's a long story on that chapter about presenting your case, which I think is so important nowadays. And it's good for people who represent themselves as well as working with a lawyer.
Yeah, that's great. I have so many questions. I know I had heard in the book that people with personality disorders have a predictable behavior. And so that's what it sounds like you're saying, is that they're predictable. You can kind of anticipate how it's going to play out. So then you can then respond better so that you're going to win your case. Is that accurate?
Yes, people send me emails saying everything you said could go wrong went wrong in my case, but I was ready because I read your book.
Uh-huh.
And so I responded. So the problem's predictable and the responses are predictable too. I put 20 years into this book of experience as a therapist and a lawyer and a mediator. Well, no. Now I've got about 40 years experience now. So the second edition has really got so much packed into it that people say it just really helps them, whatever comes up.
Many times you don't have a clinical diagnosis of the other party. Like, you might suspect that they have a personality disorder because you see some traits and things like that, but like you're never going to get a clinical diagnosis. And at first I was kind of like, well, then why would I read this book? But really, it is important because you can start to anticipate the behavior and you can prepare yourself. So that's what I've learned.
Yes, and that's the key thing. The key thing to know about personality disorders is they have a narrow range of behavior that they repeat and repeat and repeat in various different settings. So it's not a judgment. It's not this is a bad person or evil or crazy. It's that they have a narrow range of behavior that they repeat and also that doesn't work. It's an interpersonal disorder. But you don't have to diagnose somebody to say, here's like the 3 worst patterns of behavior. And so if you can explain the pattern to the court, for example, I was consulting with a client yesterday, a consultation client, and I said, how often was this person pushing and shoving and hitting and such? Because their case right now, they were told nothing's happened in the past year since you've separated, so violence isn't an issue. And I asked them, I said, well, during the marriage, how long did you see that? I said, the whole 6 years of the marriage. So there's a pattern here. When someone has a narrow pattern of behavior, it's not going to turn off with a switch. And so now that you're separated, there hasn't been any violence for the past year, doesn't mean that this person isn't still very aggressive and possibly violent with the child. By presenting the pattern, saying this, and this happened every year over the last 5 years. And the fact that it didn't this year doesn't mean it's not going to happen as the child gets older, more independent, more assertive. And you don't have to say, well, that person has a borderline personality and they have mood swings and they get violent when they're in a rage. You can just say, here's the pattern of behavior. Judges get that.
Right.
They get patterns of behavior.
Which is what's recommended. You shouldn't ever call someone out and be diagnosing them, right? That's
right.
Also...
Oh, the judges hate to hear, oh, I think my wife has borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
But you say, here's the pattern of behavior and here's the dates when it happened or roughly. That's what gets their attention because they can understand pattern of bad behavior is probably not going to change.
Right, yes. And so another question I had for you is in 2021, do you see more people representing themselves, or was that just a chapter that you wanted to include it and go more in depth on?
I think that, yes, more people are representing themselves. And if I back up, when I started practicing family law in 1993 as a family lawyer, there was probably 40% of people were representing themselves in California, and now it's around 80%. So over the last 28, 30 years, we've seen a big shift that way, and that's nationwide, actually worldwide. So in the last 10 years, it had already happened a lot, but in the last 10 years, even more so. But what I'm seeing is there's more high conflict cases that people are trying to manage on their own. So that's part of why I wrote the book the way I did, so that anybody can benefit from it. And I also encourage people to get at least an hour consultation with a lawyer if you're heading into a big hearing or a trial.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things just to know procedurally. That way you won't be caught by surprise, especially if the other parent has a lawyer and you don't. That's a big disadvantage. And the other thing is sometimes hiring a lawyer for a particular hearing is helpful, but I want people to have the full knowledge themselves.
Absolutely. And many times the attorney will sit with you on an hour by hour basis. Like I know I've done that myself as representing myself in court, and I did meet with my attorney. It wasn't too complicated of a situation, so I was able to just sit with him and kind of go over a strategy first.
Yeah.
You also mentioned in the book that many times people with personality disorders represent themselves. Like they're the ones that kind of feel confident getting out there, and so you do need to set yourself apart when you are representing yourself so that you don't come off maybe the wrong way.
Yes, because keep in mind, judges, they'll sometimes say, we see somebody representing themselves. We always wonder, are they representing themselves because they have a hard time with lawyers? Or we see somebody that's had 6 lawyers and now they're representing themselves and they think, this may be someone who has a hard time with relationships. That's one thing, is discouraging people going through a whole lot of lawyers. If you have 2, you go through one and you realize they're not the best for your situation, you hire another one. That's real common. But when you get 5, 6, 7 lawyers, now you're starting to look a little like you have a problem. So I discourage people changing lawyers like that. Work hard at making the relationship work.
Got it.
Or if you represent yourself, have someone that's consistent that can help you.
So the book mentions that we're seeing more cases of antisocial personality disorder. Can you describe this personality disorder and why do you think we're seeing more cases?
Yeah, so I would say the last, especially 3, 4 years, suddenly my consultations, and I probably consult with between 50 and 100 people a year. It's often one single session. But I would say in the last 3, 4 years that a majority of my cases have the pattern of dealing with someone with antisocial traits at least. So antisocial personality disorder or traits are basically what people think of with criminal behavior, but only about half of them actually are involved with the court system and criminal behavior. But it includes a lot of lying, aggressive behavior, lack of remorse, so a willingness to hurt people and not care about it. The lying, just lying about everything. Conning, that's another aspect of this personality. Now, people often mix up antisocial personality with narcissistic personality. So I want to emphasize the differences. Narcissists don't necessarily lie a lot, they exaggerate a lot. So if someone tells me, well, I think my husband's a narcissist and he lies all the time about everything, then I say, well, you may be dealing with someone who's narcissistic and antisocial. And so you're going to need to deal with this pretty directly. And one of the things they might say is this person has a pattern of lying to the court. And if that's one of your 3 themes, that's going to get the judge's attention, because the judge is like, yeah, you lie to each other, ho hum. oh, you lied to me. Now I don't like that. And so I tell people get transcripts from hearings and then say, here's the lie, here's the lie, here's the truth, here's the lie, here's what the facts were, so that you actually make this an issue so the court is paying attention to that. Now, I'm talking a lot about court, but the same thing happens if you're out of court. What they tell a mediator, you need to be prepared to say that's not true. This is what really happened. And evaluators, like a psychologist evaluating for a parenting plan, they'll lie to an evaluator. And so you need to be ready to say this and this and this is what's true, and here's the supporting information. So antisocial, what makes them hard is they're aggressive, which also means abusive. They engage in domestic violence. It's not uncommon. They get in a lot of fights with everybody, bar fights, street fights, fights with their employer, and may be abusive with the spouse. So understanding the abusive side, but also the lying and conning side. And that gets pretty far in family court. A lot of bad decisions I've seen recently because the court didn't have enough information to realize this is totally not true. And so, oh, I better do something about this terrible behavior. And then you find out it wasn't even true. So that's becoming a bigger problem. And that's why I put a lot about that in the book this time around.
Yeah, I do think so. It is hard for judges in courts because it takes a while for them to start to see maybe even the pattern in the courtroom, and that could take years. And staying the course when you're on the other end is so important. So, another question I had for you is about the new topics of domestic violence and parental alienation. And so, that's also something that you're talking about more in this book. Parental alienation, a kind of a hot topic right now. It seems like more and more people are talking about it. And are we seeing more of that in the courts or just more of it occurring with parents?
We're seeing more of it occurring, more of it in court. And it really, to me, I associate it with personality disorders because people with personality disorders, remember that narrow range of behavior, see things in all or nothing terms. What happens is the child absorbs that too. So it isn't just, dad's a bad dad, dad's evil and the worst person on the planet. Or it could be alienation against mom. I think of a case I had, the child said, well, mom's stupid at math. And I no longer I don't want to ever see her again. It's like, what? There's a whole lot of men stupid at math too. Me sometimes. So it's like, but what's happening is it's the emotions. And that's part of what I try to communicate is high conflict people communicate emotionally. And emotions are contagious, and the kids absorb the emotions, and they may make totally no sense. So a child gets the emotions of seeing the other parent as an evil person, but they don't understand. But they absorb the feeling. And so the feeling is something terribly wrong with the other parent. And so their brain tries to look for, well, what is it? I remember a case I had, a girl said, I don't like the way my father wears his hair, so I never want to see him again. It's because it's emotions. The reasons don't make sense. The reasons, they're trying to come up with reasons to make the emotions make sense. And to be honest, this is just the same way that prejudice works. Racial prejudice, ethnic prejudice, gender prejudice, all of that is people absorb it emotionally, especially kids, but they don't have any information. And so they come up with these just bizarre, bogus, nothing explanations. Alienation is increasing, I think, because personality disorders seem to be increasing. And the images of our society today, a lot of the news and the rapid stuff on Facebook and all, influences people's minds to see things in these all or nothing terms about other people. And that's what we're seeing. Kids absorb that and take that approach. Now, I should say that professionals are trying to shift to language that says resistance and refusal rather than alienation because they feel like alienation assumes someone's doing it on purpose. I don't think parents do this on purpose, but their emotions being so intense, so contagious, I think are driving alienation.
It makes so much sense to me, like hearing you talk about it. What is a little bit scary is what you said in the book about emotions being very convincing. And I've thought about my own experience in court. I usually, I show up and I'm afraid, I'm stressed out, and I mainly just sit there. I'm not emotional. And I'm like, oh man, am I doing something wrong by not being emotional? Because that's where the convincing comes in. And that's why these people with personality disorders can be very convincing. And so, what's your advice on bringing emotions to the courtroom?
The key, I think, is you need to be seen as a reasonable person, but you need to mention some emotional words so they pay attention. So when I suggest you have three themes that you repeat, what's the worst three patterns of behavior, that they have an emotional word in it, like manipulating professionals or lying to the court, uncontrollable anger with the child, or abusive, physical abuse of child, or undermining mother's parenting. So there's an emotional word in there, but you're not doing high conflict emotions. And that's where high conflict people, the courts start to go, wait a minute, this is over the top. And they start going, you have a problem, sir or ma'am, versus the reasonable person that uses occasional emotional words. I think that's the key. Be reasonable more than anything, but say, this is serious. There's, lying, manipulation, abuse, whatever it is, but you have to support that. And if that's true, get it out there.
So, being clear, using emotional words, keeping it in check is all really good advice.
Maybe this is a really good thing. Let's narrow this down. Mention emotional words, but communicate as a reasonable person.
Yes.
Maybe that's the way to say it.
That's an important clarification because I think when you're in court, it can be emotional, and then if you're coming off extremely emotional, I'm not so sure that it's a good way to be.
Well, just the high conflict emotions. So, don't burst into tears, don't start yelling, don't look out of control. You want to look like someone who's in control, that's communicating useful information. So, in many ways, you want to look like a lawyer who is saying, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, but the judge respects because the lawyer's reasonable. Now, there are some lawyers who are over the top.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I remember, actually, this is funny. I had an older man, a retired accountant, and the lawyer for his wife is standing up and saying, and he's pointing a finger at my client and saying to the judge, and he did this and he did that, which is really exaggerations. And it bothered my client so much, he yells out the BS word. and and the judge is like,
Oh no.
Mr. Eddy, please admonish your client about proper courtroom decorum. And Mr. So and so, I think you can tone it down a little bit. So, so even lawyers go over the top and get chastised for it occasionally.
So it frightened me to think about someone making false allegations of domestic violence or sexual abuse that wasn't true just to get custody of the kids, which, the courts have to take seriously. And many times they do just kind of blindly believe these allegations, which is mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
What's your advice to parents who are dealing with a high conflict divorce and need to prepare for the worst and kind of anticipating these types of allegations?
Yeah, first of all, keeping a journal of incidents, of anything that happens that you could possibly be accused of doing something wrong. If there's an argument, you did this or you didn't do that, write down what really happened, if you can, the same day. So you can date your note.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're ever in court and have to say or submit a declaration, you can say on this date, this is what happened, so that you have accurate information. You become known as a good record keeper, an accurate note taker of things. So, and if the other parent, say, doesn't show up for their parenting on a day, or they call at the last minute and say, I have to cancel, make a note of that. I have cases where there's a parent saying, I want more parenting time, and it's more often dad. And mom says, well, dad has not even used the parenting time he has, and I have this detailed record. Well, that's very persuasive in court. If dad says, hey, I need more time, and mom says he's not using his time,
Yeah.
and the judge is like, well, dad, is that accurate? Well, and by the way, this is the other way around too sometimes. So I'm really not, the examples I give, maybe mom, maybe dad, but I've seen both genders have all of these problems, including domestic violence.
Sure. I have kind of personal stories of like my sweet little boy shoved a popcorn kernel up his nose when we were on vacation, and I had to take him to the ER. And these are things that he had brought up in court of examples of why I was a bad mother or something. And I didn't have any detailed notes on it, but you make a good point that even, the little stuff that happens, you never know if like what they're going to bring up later on in court. And you may as well just keep a nice little journal about dates and times and how you dealt with it so that you can bring that out later.
Exactly. So for example, with the kernel up the nose, as it happened this day, and then we tried to deal with it, and then we went to the ER. The key isn't that you don't have problems. There's no parent of a 3-year-old that doesn't have problems. The question is, how do you deal with the problems? I'll give you an example. I represented a mom with 3 and 4-year-old kids. They were in the other room. They got in an argument, and one of them scratched the other on the forehead. So there's a scratch, an obvious scratch. Mom stopped the fighting, and anyway, kids go to dad and see the scratch. What happened? Oh, the kids were fighting in the other room. Oh, you left them unattended. And so he complained about that in his effort to change the plan.
Exactly.
And he was so emotional about it. Remember, emotions are contagious. That the counselor evaluator wrote down that the child received several scratches on the forehead. That added to other things, looked like my client wasn't a responsible mom. And we got to court, and I cross-examined the evaluator, and I said, because both parties had said one scratch. Dad had said one scratch in his paperwork, mom had said, but this counselor said several scratches. And I asked the counselor, I said, where did you get the several from? Because both parties said it was just one scratch. And the counselor was like, I thought the father said that. He was so upset.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's how emotions can make people exaggerate. And he was emotional, and it was absorbed. Emotions are contagious. So that's why it really helps to have good notes and dates, I think. If you don't have that, reconstruct it with a day or two later if you can't do it the same day. But that's what people are up against in family court. And all judges see is, the written report or the one-sided testimony. So you've got to get through like this.
It's so interesting that even that those emotions can change people's perception of even what was said. So that's an excellent point. And
even of professionals, and that's important to know.
Yes, absolutely. So anything else you want to add about the splitting book to let people know?
Just, try to settle your case. Because people often wonder, well, you can't settle a case with a high conflict person. Well, often you can. I'd say most cases end up settled. It's just a question of when. And going to mediation is a good way to do that. Having a lawyer for consultation and advice, even if you don't hire them to represent you, it often helps to have a counselor who you can visit from time to time to help cope with stress, as well as understand my co-parent has some rigid thinking. What do you think I should do about this situation or that situation? So get help. Don't be afraid to get help. If you need to just get an hour here or there, you can save some money. But things can really go wrong in family court because judges don't have much time. They can only decide based on what they see. And most people in society still don't know how much there are some people lying and manipulating out there. And I think I've seen as many in family court as just about anywhere in the world. So you've got to be prepared and read this book.
Yes, it's hard to backtrack once the judge makes a certain decision. It's hard to get back in court. It can take a long time. So definitely investing, getting some knowledge by reading the book and even seeing an attorney. Great advice. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. And I want to congratulate you on launching your podcast called It's All Your Fault. What will you be talking about in your new podcast, It's All Your Fault?
We're talking about dealing with high conflict people and in any situation. So we talk about family situations, divorce situations, neighbor situations, a lot about workplace situations, every area of life. And we go into some detail on 5 high conflict personalities and different patterns. And one of the big things to me is how people fool other people because of the emotions. They communicate emotionally and yet not factually. We cover all of that, and I'm doing it with Megan Hunter, the CEO of High Conflict Institute. We have speakers, we have staff, but the two of us founded High Conflict Institute, and we have a lot of fun talking about really what we've been learning all these years that we want to share with everybody else.
It's an excellent resource. Congratulations to you and Megan. And thank you so much for being on the show, Bill. I hope that you'll join me again.
I'm looking forward to it. Always good to work with you, Bianca.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us this week on the Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast. I hope the time was well spent and you got a lot out of the episode. If so, please rate and review the podcast. I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in sending me a feedback message, asking a question, suggesting a podcast topic or guest, or downloading Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as a tool for better communication with your co-parent, go to peacefulparentapp.com or see the links in the show notes. Have a great week, and as always, stay peaceful.
This episode of Peaceful Co-Parent was brought to you by the Equal Shared Parenting Program. Do you find that you're ever in need of someone to talk to, like a counselor or a therapist? How about legal advice? If you've looked into it, you know these services can add up financially. That's why the Equal Shared Parenting Program exists, to help parents be their healthiest holistic selves. It's a membership program that offers discounted and free services like behavioral health, free tax prep and advice, and access to financial education and credit counseling, all for the low price of $29.99 a month. Learn more about the Equal Shared Parenting Program by going to equalsharedparentingbenefits.org/PCPM. The PCPM stands for Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger. That's equalsharedparentingbenefits.org/PCPM.